Hi, welcome to Virginia Time Travel, your portal of the Commonwealth's past, present, and future. Over 600,000 men died in the American Civil War. Some people say that ghosts from that war still haunt certain battlefields, forever living out their final moments. The best known Civil War ghosts are ghosts at Gettysburg, but this area also has a famous battlefield at Manassas, and perhaps even its own Civil War ghosts. Our guest today has been on a 25-year personal journey that has taken her from historical research to paranormal investigation. She's Paula Kirby, the author of A Yankee Roams at Dusk. And I have to warn you, if you pick this book up, you're not going to be able to put it down because it's a real page-turner. Paula, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I'm so glad to be here.
So, how did this personal 25-year journey begin?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's almost 40 years now since I actually started this project, but there was a hiatus of about 20 years in between. So I took a break and came back to it later. And it is appropriate that I'm on Virginia Time Travel because we really are traveling back in time with this book. And it all started, golly, when I was living in Manassas, very close to the Manassas battlefield, in a neighborhood called Zouave Hills. And it just so happens that our ghost is wearing the uniform of the Zouave, the 5th New York Zouave soldier.
So I guess you better tell us what a Zouave is exactly.
Yes, and well, that I guess I could start with that, but I'd rather start by telling you how I came to go looking for him in the first place. I was taking creative writing classes with my neighbor, Janie Yates, who is very much a part of this story. And we were both of us making B's in this particular class, and our professor said, if you do something extra credit, you can both get A's. Well, she came in one day with this newspaper article in the Journal Messenger, which is the Manassas paper at the time. And there was an article there that said, who knows what evil lurks? And beneath it was an account of area haunted houses and ghosts, and then this one ghost in particular, this mysterious Zouave soldier who had been seen on the New York Avenue field at Manassas battlefield. It also stated that numerous people had seen him, and there was one in particular who still lived in Manassas, who also worked at Manassas battlefield. He was a park ranger at the time. And so we made arrangements to go and see him, and we thought we would do an article about him and what he had seen, and it just started. It just started a whole process of going from one eyewitness to the other. We wanted to verify that these people had really seen what they said. And so we went and did that, and in the process of trying to find out, okay, the 5th New York Zouave, who are they? Why were they here? What were they doing? I went to the Battlefield Museum and talked to Stuart Vogt, who was the historian at that time there, and he let me use all of his resource materials. But I asked him, I said, Stuart, do you suppose if I could get a list of all the names of all the soldiers from the 5th New York who were here on the battlefield during that second battle, that might help me to try to narrow down now who this ghost might be, because people were describing him as a certain way, being very tall and had, the dark beard and all of these things, and described the uniform to a T, which is a turban. We had a white turban in this case, and these baggy red breeches and blue jacket and white leggings, which are called gaiters. They would describe seeing all these things, Well, here I am, gathering up my people to interview, and I get a call from Stuart from the battlefield, and he says, Paula, can you meet me over at the stone house? And I said, well, sure. And he says, well, come on over, and I've got something to show you. When I arrived, he showed me in the floorboard of an upstairs bedroom, 2 names that were carved there, partial names, they weren't complete. And he said, we believe that after all these years of thinking that these were the names, these names belong to the builders of Stonehouse, that they are actually 2 soldiers from the same regiment as your ghost, Charles Brem and Eugene Gear. Everybody got goosebumps, and at that moment I knew, I said that was the pivotal point for me, that it became less of a search for the ghost and who he might be, although I didn't ever let that go, still to this day. But it was to find out everything I could about these 2 young men and tell their story from their perspective, through their eyes. And I learned everything that I could about the 5th New York Zouave Regiment and what had happened to them on that field. So that is part 1 of my book. That is the most important part of the story, I think. Takes precedence over ghost hunting any day, because ghosts are elusive. You really can't really put your finger on them. You can hope to find something. We found things like the smell of gunpowder, of decaying flesh. These things I even picked up. And I am what is known as a psychic dud. I see nothing, I hear nothing, I sense nothing, you know.
But you smelled something.
But I sure smelled something, you bet. And it was powerful, and it really frightened me, because nothing like that had ever happened before. And that's the funny thing about when you're out looking for ghosts and things are happening, that some people see, some people don't, and some people get stronger impressions than others. I usually get absolutely nothing, which puts me in a very good position, because my whole job from the very beginning was to be an investigative reporter. And because I'm certainly not a historian, although I sure know a whole lot more now than I did before, I'm not anything but a writer and an observer, neutral, because I didn't want to be influenced by what I saw and heard and smelled. I wanted to record what other people were experiencing, and I think I succeeded in doing that, and yet not saying, oh yes, he's out there and I saw him, you know, because I think that casts sometimes more doubt on things than.
Well, and I think that's what made your book so interesting, was that people could relate to the person who was writing it. It was like, what is going on here? I don't have an agenda. I'm just pulling the thread, and all of these strange things I'm coming upon.
Exactly, and it was a kind of a progressive. I was very methodical. I made sure I didn't leave any stones unturned. I wanted to be sure that these people who said they saw these ghosts were really seeing these ghosts. And the night when we finally did, and that was another thing, trying to find legitimate psychic investigators to come and actually do, investigation of the field. And we were successful in doing that. It was a 2-day investigation, and they really, the people that were there were psychics and controls. There was a special machine that would, if they found a cold spot, it would measure the cold spot. We got one. Okay, that was exciting. But for a while, everyone was seeing things and hearing and smelling things. I smelled, nothing else. But we didn't trust the feelings and what people were saying they were seeing. There was some special equipment brought along for the purpose. We had a special machine that could actually measure a cold spot, and that's when the temperature does not drop according to the measurer, but everyone who goes in is freezing cold. But there's no change in the temperature on the machine. There was special photographic equipment brought from the University of Maryland that has always been successful in catching unusual activity. But they also required that anyone with a camera take pictures at the very same time. And we must have had 12 cameras going all at the same time. And the results were probably what these parapsychologists that came, these investigators that came, were the most interested in, because all of them failed to show anything. They were all what they called bleached out, which means, in their language, there was an energy field there, something that didn't allow photographs to be taken. And that was probably the most recordable thing that happened. Otherwise, it was just a bunch of people saying, "Oh, I see this," or "I see that," and you know. So that was quite an interesting thing for me to see.
And I think it's important that folks realize that at least some of the researchers were under the auspices of the University of Virginia.
Correct.
And the University of Virginia is one of only 3 universities in the United States that actually sponsors research into reincarnation and parapsychology. At the University of Virginia, it was funded by the founder of Xerox. He left millions of dollars for the investigation of reincarnation and such phenomenon as this. So this isn't just a bunch of people running around out in the woods.
That's correct. That's correct. And they trusted these photographers from Maryland University to come. They called them in because they had done this kind of thing before. Yes, the university that you mentioned, that was Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was the head of that paranormal department at the time. And it was he who was running around the world trying to find evidence of reincarnation in children. There's a book by Tom Schroeder, Old Souls, about that. It's a marvelous book. But he would have been the one, but he was preoccupied with his reincarnation search. So he was the one who recommended these people to come from North Carolina, and they arrived and did the investigation for us.
Now, I think one of the things that was so interesting is it's called a Yankee roams at dusk, but there was more than one ghost. I mean,
initially it was one, always was one, and then the night of the investigation, they all came out, and that was when we first knew that the whole darn regiment was still hanging around, or it seemed to be that way. But the greeter, where they called him the greeter, was the one who beckoned to one of the eyewitnesses to come. And that particular eyewitness had a chilling account of an out-of-body experience that day, and that's recorded in the book. It's kind of done in an as-it-happened way, as if you're there with them, and it's going on through their point of view, not my point of view.
But it's interesting because they talk about the ghosts acting as if the battle were still in progress.
Yeah.
And of course, we read in many parts of history the ghosts of the Battle of Mons in World War I, and about these people who fight these battles over and over again through history. They're somehow frozen in time.
Right. They call that residual haunting. It's repeating the same thing over and over again, never varying from the routine. All right? This was different. This ghost tried to interact with these eyewitnesses. He beckoned, he waved with a kepi, he moved in different positions around the field. So it was out of character. It was out of ghostly character. And so that's why the investigators were so intrigued. This was nothing they had ever encountered before. And so they went away with all of their notes and eventually came to the conclusion that there was enough evidence there that there was something going on at the field, but that's about what you get is here's our results, but we can't really say for sure that it's a Zouave or whatever.
Right.
Because,
Now, interestingly enough, one of your eyewitnesses seemed to have a personal connection. They seemed to be calling to him.
That's the one.
As if maybe he were a reincarnated.
He felt that beckoning greeter, he called him, he didn't know why he wanted him to come. At first it seemed harmless, But as time wore on, when he had that out-of-body experience, he felt as though he was moving closer to the apparition, but he himself had not moved out of position. And he knew it was his choice whether to go or to stay. And the whole idea later was, he said, I think he was trying to lure me in at that point into some. So he was like, he was terrified, and he didn't want to go back. And we had a lot of trouble with him during the investigation because he would feel threatened. If he got off the blacktop and onto the field, he felt that the blacktop was a safe area for him. So when all the regiment came out at once, according to the people that could see, it was bedlam, and everybody went home.
But you mentioned over a period of time numerous people, and you tracked them all down.
Tracked them all down.
How many people would you say had independently seen the ghost at different times?
Well, they're all in here. I didn't do a head count, but
10 or
there's
12?
I would say 10 or 12.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there was also, well, I asked questions like, well, did anybody ever see him before these people? Is there other reports, or after these people? Has there been any more reports? And there hadn't been, other than Dennis Kelly, who was a historian at the battlefield at that time, said that there had been a rumor around the turn of the century of this particular same apparition dressed in this zouave outfit.
Now, I think you mentioned that there have been sightings at other places on the battlefield, or at least there are legends.
Oh, yeah. There's Deep Cut and various places that even battle reenactments, like you hear at any battlefield. Battlefields are full of it, just full of it.
And at Stonehouse, too. Isn't that the case, or?
Not an apparition.
Not
well, now I have to take that back. Some people say they see somebody in the window looking out, and they see a soldier in the yard, with a horse or something of that sort.
Now,
But,
part of the theory is that, and I think you mentioned that it's like the ghost is looking for somebody or something, and I guess from ghostology, if you call that. That's why ghosts remain, because they have unfinished business. And
this particular ghost does display one of his things that he does is he's like searching the ground. He's looking for something on the ground, and no one really knows what that might be. Looking for a friend. There is a sketch by Mr. Tabor, I believe his name is, showing a soldier bent over on the ground looking for, and it's called Looking for a Friend, and that's the same kind of activity that it appears that he's doing. That's one of the things that he does. But this particular one, this greeter, seemed to be very active at this particular time, 1976 to about 1981. And then, and it was trying to also establish the validity of our eyewitnesses was not an easy thing to do. So I checked into their backgrounds, and like I said, there was this, I said they all seemed to be perfectly normal, except the one, the first eyewitnesses that we finally tracked last, because we wanted to get somebody who'd never heard about the ghost. We didn't want them to know anything prior to having seen him on the field the first time. Not only had they not ever seen him before or heard about him before, but they didn't even know what a zouave was. And if I have time, we'll get around to the zouave. But I did want to tell this little story about Joanne Morris in the book. That I said the only thing strange about her when we went to her home was that she had 2 boa constrictors in her home. Those were her pets, and she indicated that dogs were too noisy. Well, when it came time to get release forms later, after their eyewitness account, I had written their eyewitness account. She wrote me a letter returning the form signed, and said that I had done exactly what had happened. I had written it just as it had happened. And I had asked her how were the boa constrictors, and she said, well, we had to get rid of them, and the dogs were too noisy, but we got a dog anyway, and yes, he's noisy. But at the bottom of her letter, there was a little note that caught my attention. And I said, what is she talking about? If you have a chance, check out the painting, Save the Colors, by Keith Rocco. Note the sergeant in the middle. This was done in the year 2000. Her husband had bought it for her because for a birthday gift, because she said, look, David, her husband, she said, look at him. There's our ghost.
Oh.
So that's why she said that's exactly what he looks like, all right? Well, I had the privilege of meeting Keith Rocco in person, bought my print directly from him, and was able to ask him, who did you use as your model? And he said, well, I know who I used for this one and this one and this one. But he says, you know, as I recall, I didn't use a model. He says, I used a composite of several, put them all together. And I thought, well, now that's interesting. Somebody else was at work on that particular image, you know. But no, Joanne was, I mean, she was just like floored. That was her ghost, and she's sticking to it. I mean, that's it, so.
Now, you say that this journey has kind of changed your view of life, and would you like to elaborate on that?
Not so much.
Okay.
I think that I'm going to look here and see what was important to me. Yeah, you wanted to know more about the Zouaves, didn't you?
Yes.
All right, and how I came to know it was even a Zouave. I did some research on it. They're actually, the uniform is very much like it was the French Foreign Legion. It began in North Africa. There was a tribe called the Zouawas. And the French, when they took Algiers, I think it was 1830 or something like that, they enlisted the help of these Zouawas to keep order in the city. And they began to imitate their military style and their style of dress. And that's, I guess, when the French Foreign Legion was actually born. And if it hadn't have been for Elmer Ellsworth, who is the young man who was the first Union officer killed, and his regiment was the first to invade southern space, the southern territory. That story, are you familiar with Elmer? Yes.
Sure.
And so that story is included in the book also, but if it hadn't been for him and his passion for military tactics and his enamor of these beautiful uniforms, there never would have been Zouaves. And as it turned out, because he was killed, like almost as a martyr for the North, he was revered almost as a hero, and there was a Zouave craze. The whole country went nuts. Everybody was dressing in the Zouave style, women, children, and he started the whole thing, you know, and that's how they got started here. There were like 80 Union Zouave outfits and about 20 Confederate. This is about. The Confederate, one of the most famous was Wheat's Louisiana Tigers, with their black and white striped pantaloons. And it turns out, I found out a little bit more about them, that most of them had been recruited from the New Orleans jail. I thought that was interesting. But yeah, there were a lot of Zouaves out there, and they were all sitting ducks in battle.
Wow.
You know?
Oh, sure.
They truly were.
I'm sure that red didn't attract any attention at all.
Not at all. But you know, they were so proud of them, their uniforms. And there is a uniform in the Manassas battlefield that I've seen now twice. In fact, I brought a picture. I know you can't see it, but I'll show it to you anyway, of me holding the uniform, this Zouave, and you can close up on it, that I saw for the first time back in 1978, and then in 2011 was able to see it again. And it's in a special drawer. And they know, you know, this uniform was like a new uniform, but it was of a 5th New York Zouave who had fought, and his uniform was so bloodied and beat up that he had to replace it with a new one, which he wore in parades in New York. He was like a New York policeman.
Well, I'm sure folks will want to look into this more. Where is the book available? And
well, I'm hoping soon that it will be available on Amazon, both in book and Kindle form. In the meantime, they can contact me directly at my email address, and I'll be happy to. Also, we have a wreath laying ceremony that happens every August on the New York Avenue field. And the Zouave reenactment group comes out in full dress, and a wreath is laid, and a prayer is said, and all the names of the men of the Fifth are called out. It's quite special. My hope is to have all of the eyewitnesses and others that were involved during that time period to show up. We're all going to show up at once and have a big reunion. They love the public to come, and they're very proud of what they do and what the Fifth has done. And so I would like to invite anyone who would be interested, and if they'll email me, I can let them know the time and the date of that particular thing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Paula, and
Thank
you
you
for tuning into Virginia Time Travel. This has been brought to you by a generous gift from the Margarita W. and Donald J. Metzger Endowment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.